Today I want to automate document digitization or document scanning. It's a really boring job that consumes loads of people's valuable time in a lot of businesses, especially ones that have been around for quite a while and have come from paper records, perhaps accountants or architects, or certainly local government and councils. And they've got walls of these documents that they intend to get to. That job usually gets assigned to the most junior person, or sometimes it's an entire job role, but inevitably that person becomes too valuable to be doing this low value task and get moved on to something else, and this job never gets completed. Often it goes on for years and years and years. Let's dive into a demo and see how we can almost fully automate this. Obviously I can't automate the person putting the paper into the scanner, but other than that I think humans shouldn't really be involved in this low value task. Let's jump in and take a look. So we're over in N8N and I just wanted to briefly outline the workflow before I demonstrate it, and then we'll dive into a detailed analysis so that you can set this all up for yourself from scratch. So what we're essentially doing here is the user will scan a document, and in our case we've configured the scanner to drop that document straight into SharePoint. So what we're going to do with our workflow is pick up, if I scroll in a little bit here, we'll pick up those files from SharePoint and we'll process those files. And when I say process, I mean there's some normalization of the document that needs doing in some cases, such as removing blank pages or correcting orientation. And then we're also going to convert that to an image so we can do some advanced OCR using OpenAI's OCR API. And once we've extracted the information that we need from the document, then we're going to essentially just upload that to SharePoint in the correct location. So we're scanning and filing, and it's really as simple as that. So without further ado, let's demonstrate this process. So I've got these two files here that have been scanned, and I'll put them into this drop folder here because that's where I've configured the workflow to pick them up from. Before we actually run the first process, I just want to open one of these documents and show you why some of this normalization. Now, I realize that some of the stuff on this document here will be blurred out because it's sensitive information, but you should be able to see after the edit here that the information on the cover page, which is what we need to actually file the document in the correct place, has been handwritten on. And of course, when humans have been involved, handwriting, one, it's not always easy to read, but they don't always use the exact name. And in our case, it's the client name that's often not exact. There's a lot of abbreviations that happen. And the AI in this workflow is able to infer and figure out the correct folder where to file this document. Okay, so let's hit run on this demo. So hit test workflow, and you can see that it's started running here. So it should be picking up the documents and starting to process them. Now it does take a while to normalize the documents and actually process them. So in the meantime, I thought I'd just quickly show you the complexity of where we're actually trying to file this information. So I'll jump over to SharePoint here, and this is the drop folder where it's going to process one after the next. Something else I should call out: if you have lots and lots of scanned documents, it will just do one after the next, so it can deal with the batch. And where I'm trying to drop these documents, so here is the clients folder where all the clients exist, and obviously these folders will probably be blurred out, but I just wanted to give you some sort of idea. If I start scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, there's 1600 plus client folders in here, and the AI can still figure out which folder to actually drop the file in. The other thing I wanted to point out is the destination in this particular case will be in this folder here, which is 2022, or at least one of those two documents is going to land in this subfolder 2022, but the instruction is that it should have another subfolder called scanned, and that folder doesn't yet exist. So I just wanted to show that that folder doesn't exist for this particular client in this particular year. Some clients it already exists, and some clients it doesn't exist, and some clients the year doesn't exist. So we can handle all that folder creation stuff. Let's jump back to the workflow and see how we're getting on. Okay, so the workflow finished running, and I actually went away and had lunch as well in the meantime. And if we dive over into our SharePoint, and we can see in the same folder that we were looking at before, we've now got a scanned subfolder created. And in that scanned subfolder, we've got a file that's been renamed with the naming convention that's the client's requested or that we've set out in the workflow. And if I open that file, it should load a file that looks very much like the one that we had pre-processing. And sure enough, that's the same file correctly filed. So let's dive back over into N8N, and we'll break down the workflow in detail so that you should be able to follow along and recreate the entire thing yourself without the template. I'll go into all the prompts so that you can screenshot them or pause the video there if you want. And there's a few scripts in here which I'll also make available to you. Okay, let's get into it. There's quite a lot to cover here. I'll go from left to right. I'll try and go through it as quickly as possible without skipping anything. So bear with me. First thing here, we've got a trigger. I think that's really self-explanatory. I've got a click trigger, which is just helping me test the workflow really. And I've got a schedule trigger. For me, I've got it processing at 7 p.m. at night. So if the user or staff member scans a whole bunch of documents in the day, they'll all get picked up in a batch at 7 o'clock at night. You can just change that to suit your needs. Perhaps you want to poll a folder every minute. I think that's self-explanatory. Getting into the actual workflow then. So we've got a SharePoint folder, which is really just a HTTP call. This node does exist in N8N, so you can deploy the actual SharePoint node. You're going to need to set up authentication, so let's start there. I've obviously already got one here, and I'll just hit edit. Now in this authentication, if you're on self-hosted like me, which to set up this workflow exactly, you will need to be, you will also need to create an application registration in Microsoft Entra. So I'll quickly dive over into Entra and show you the flip side of this. So in Entra here, entra.microsoft.com, you can go to app registrations down here and you can see I've got a couple. I'm not going to create a new one now, but what you would do is create a new one and give it a name. I'm going to dive into my existing one. The things that you're going to need from your application is your application ID. So just copy paste that client ID, application ID, and store that for copying over to N8N. The other thing you'll need to do is create a secret. So go to certificates and secrets, create a new secret, and just note the value that you get from that. And you'll also need to give your app registration some API permissions. So go down to API permissions. For the purpose of this workflow, we're going to need some SharePoint permissions. So what you do is hit add a permission. And in this list somewhere, there's SharePoint. Scroll on down and find SharePoint, delegated permissions, and then choose the ones that you need. So for this workflow, it's all sites.read and all sites.write. So add those in. When you add them in, you won't have these green ticks. So make sure to click the grant admin consent button. And once you've done that, you should be good to go. So you can dive back over to N8N. And these authorization URLs are the same for any application, so you can just screenshot that and copy those as they are, or they're well documented as well. Then you can copy and paste your client ID and your client secret into there. And you also need to give a subdomain, which is the part of your SharePoint URL. So I'll jump over to SharePoint. So I've got here sharepoint.com. It's the piece before the sharepoint.com. So just copy that name and put that into the subdomain. Once you've done that, there should be a button down the bottom to connect, I believe. Yep, so just hit connect my account and then follow through the authentication workflow and it should come back connected. Cool. Then the other thing we need to do, so this is getting the files from the folder that we've configured to store our files. So in the URL, I'll open this up so you can kind of screenshot it. So after SharePoint.com, this is the API that we're hitting. So we're hitting API web get folder by server relative URL, and then we're putting in the relative URL. So that's the path to the folder. And then this is just telling the endpoint what we're trying to do. So we're trying to obtain files. So you just adapt that to your environment. And that should download the files. Next thing here is just a code node. I'll open that up so you can, you can just copy it. That's just extracting the file name. So you can see here in that run that it's extracted a file name of image.003 and passed it on to the next node for processing. Really, that's all that's doing. There are other ways to do that, but you can go ahead and copy and paste that code. To be honest, this is actually redundant. In the first version of this workflow, I was pre-pending the word processed to the file so that in subsequent runs, it didn't run already processed files, but now I am moving, well, I'll show you. Now I'm moving the file to a subfolder called processed, but the renaming I didn't take away, probably out of laziness. So you can see that they're getting renamed processed and the date of when they were actually processed. So you could probably just delete that or keep it or repurpose it for your own purpose. And then I've got an Airtable node here, so I'll go into that. And we're storing data in the Airtable node for other nodes to use later. It also means that when we're troubleshooting, we can see what has happened with any given files if anything's gone wrong. So for Airtable, you can see I've got a credential here. I'll quickly show you how to create a personal access token for Airtable. But really, that's all you need. So the rest of it's populated for you. And you just need to make sure when you create the personal access token that you give it the appropriate scopes. So we'll dive over into Airtable. And if you go to airtable.com/create/tokens. Then you can find the place to create your personal access tokens. Go ahead and create a new token and give it a meaningful name and give it the scopes that we saw listed in the documentation on N8N. So that's pretty much as simple as that. Once you create the token, copy and paste that over into N8N. So now we've got our files that we're going to process from our SharePoint folder. If we've got a big batch, we want to loop over those items, and I think that's pretty straightforward. So we're just going to go into this loop. We're going to set the batch size to 1, so we're just going to process one at a time and run through them. So the first thing here, we've got this is an execute node. So this is going to execute a command against my virtual machine that I'm hosting N8N on. So I'll quickly jump into that and explain in very brief, but really what this is doing is it's changing directory to the root folder of where my scripts are working on the virtual machine, and then I'm running several commands. So it's got N8N, that means also run this command. So I'm just RM, which is removing stuff. So I'm deleting any remnants which might be there from previous runs or any errors that I've had from these 3 folder locations. And if I quickly dive over into my virtual machine where I'm hosting my N8N, you can see I am already in that location and I've got some subfolders. If I show you this source folder, again, those are folders themselves. So there's Python scripts in each of those folders that do basically each of those things. I think those names are quite self-explanatory. And you'll see that this PDF to image converter, blank page detector, orientation normalizer, cover page detector, they marry up with the execute nodes that you'll see in the workflow. So that covers that. Let's go to the next thing. Now that I've got a clean folder to work with, I need to actually get the file from SharePoint. So it's going to download the file. I'll open this up so you can hopefully just go ahead and copy this information. So I'll get this URL. Obviously, you need to adjust this for your own use case. But basically, I'm going to SharePoint, this particular API endpoint, which is the same one as before. And the value on the end here, dollar value, I think it's actually a bug or there's a mismatch in the documentation, but I did find out that adding this dollar value on the end will ultimately download the file. And it has done here. What's interesting though is you can see that the extension that it's downloaded, even though the file is a PDF, it's downloaded a file called .bin and the MIME type of application /octet stream, which is not quite what we want. So we've got a quick code node here. I'll open that up and I'll make it big so you can just screenshot that so you can copy all that text. I should also say I'm going to make this whole template available in the community. So if you want to save heaps of time and retyping this out or screenshotting or pausing all the way along, sign up to the community. It's like $9 a month, super cheap, and just download the template. Even if you just leave the community straight away, it will save you loads of time. So that converts the file to a PDF. And then we're going to store that PDF on our virtual machine so we can work with and process those files in the next stage. So if I just go into there, you'll be able to see, and I'll open that up, that I'm giving it a relative path to store a raw PDF file to work with. Okay, so we've got our file on the disk. Let's start to process it. You'll see I've got these 4 processing with Python nodes, which relate or map to the folders that we just looked at and the scripts that are stored on the local machine. Let's just go into each one and have a quick look. This first one here is going to convert the PDF file to an image. So I'll quickly show you so you can capture it. But as I say this, I realize I'm going to need to make these Python scripts available. In essence, I'm just changing to the directory where the scripts are, and they're all like this, so we'll skip over them pretty quick. We launch the virtual environment, and if you are not familiar with virtual environments, then it's a well-documented process. Just give it a quick Google or a ChatGPT and have it explain it to you. And then I run the script. But essentially what this is doing is it's converting the PDF file into JPEG files, into PNG files. And the reason for that is in this next stage here is I want to pass a PNG file to OpenAI for some advanced OCR, which I can't do with a PDF. So we're converting it to PNG files. We're removing the blank pages, and this is basically, there's not much more to see here than there was in the last one. I'm fixing the page orientation. So if some of the pages are orientated the wrong way, it'll correct these, and then it's going to also label which page is the cover page, because it's only the cover page for this particular client or this particular piece of work that I need to read so that I can file things in the right place. So I don't need to know all the other information. Everything is on the cover. Okay, so the next thing to do then is read the cover page. So I've got this node here to read the cover page, and I'll expand this out so you can see exactly the command that I'm passing to read the file, but it's just reading from disk, and I'm passing in some wildcards here. So we'll pick up anything with the PNG, well, with cover page PNG. And then we'll pass that into this OpenAI node here for analyze image. So in your OpenAI node, choose resource type of image and analyze image. And then I will open up this prompt. I'm not going to read it out verbatim, but I just wanted to open it up so you can read it, screenshot, whatever. Cool. Okay. And the input type is going to be binary, and it will be data, which is usually the input type for binary. And you can see that it's spat out here, as per the instructions, some JSON, but it's not really formatted it in proper JSON. It's like a JSON string. So we've got the next node here, which is a code node, and I'll open that up so you can copy it, but it is really just converting that to some usable JSON. So if I open that up there you go. And you can see the output here is some more usable JSON for the next stage. Okay, so if I jump over to the Airtable tool, here's the tool that the agent actually has to access. And we're going to need a personal access token for that Airtable, so we can use the one that we created before. It should automatically populate. We want to set this to tool description can be automatic. We're looking for resource of type record and operation search. And you just choose your base from the list and the table, which is called client folder. And I want to return all, so it does return a lot of information. And if I jump over to that Airtable, which is just over here, you can see that I've got a table in here which lists all of those client folders, and I have pulled those from SharePoint. So I wrote a little PowerShell script to scroll through SharePoint and pull all those out for me, and I've uploaded them into here for my AI agent tool. And then the final thing here is to reconstruct the PDF. So this is the final execute node, or the final script that runs on the VM, where I'm reconstructing the PNG files back into one PDF ready for uploading. Okay, so we've got all the information that we need to actually start uploading the file, but before we do upload the file, we need to do a couple of things for me, and that was namely make sure the folder path exists. So as I pointed out earlier in the video, in one of my examples, the subfolder scans didn't exist, and for some of these clients, the subfolder of the year doesn't exist if they've not had any records for that year before. So we've got a SharePoint node here. I'll dive into it so you can sort of see it for your own reference, and obviously you need to adapt it for your own use case. But we are hitting this endpoint of the API for SharePoint. So we've got API web folders, and then the information in terms of creating a folder needs to be in the body. So scroll on down. Of course, you need the authentication. So we use the same as before. We're going to send some headers, which is accept and application JSON data equals verbose. And finally in the body, so I'll explain, this is the key to it, I suppose. I'll open this up so you can copy and adapt it for your own use case. So we're hitting the server relative URL, and this is the path of where we're trying to create the folder. And then this has been dynamically calculated based on the previous nodes, and it's more clear really if you see it on the right hand side exactly what's getting passed over. And in this case, we're creating the year folder, and if the year folder already exists, which it did on this particular run, nothing happens. So it doesn't overwrite it, so you're pretty safe there, and it just returns some metadata about that folder. And then this is just a rinse and repeat, but for the next layer down in our hierarchy for the scan folder, it did create this folder as you sort of saw, and it just returns the same metadata. So it's a safe operation, and now we know that we've got our folder path. If they do error, one other thing I should point out, quickly go back in here. So I've got settings, and on error, I've got continue using error as an output. So that gives us an extra branch on that node, and you can see these ones here under error, and it gives me the opportunity to pass stuff off to this, let's call it the error handling branch. So if I have an error, I want to still upload the file somewhere so a human can come and intervene later. And that somewhere, if I jump over to SharePoint, is this fallback folder here, and there's nothing in there at the moment. But if I do have errors, that's where it's going to be. So a human can come and review and tidy that up later. So that should cover that. So now I've got the folder path created. I'm ready to upload my file to PDF. So I'm going to read it from the disk, and I'll expand that out, and you can just sort of see where I'm reading that file from. You'd obviously need to adapt this to your own use case. And then I'm going to rename the file, and I will open this, but just bear in mind that this is very specific to my client's request. So I'll open the code so you can see it. But the summary here is you would need to rename your own thing or adapt this script or do your own thing in this case. Then finally, we're ready to upload to SharePoint. So let's open this one. It's a post to the SharePoint API endpoint for get folder by server relative URL. And then we've got a couple of actions that we're specifying after the path here. So we've got files is what we're doing, and ultimately we're adding a file. So that's how to upload. And if the file already exists in our case, we've got true. You might want to set that to false if the file already exists. And the same thing as per the other SharePoint node with the headers. So we've got accept and application JSON and OData equals verbose in here. And we're passing in a binary file. And in our run, you can see that that was successful. So in our case, really, the workflow's basically finished. We don't need to do anything else. I'm not going to go over this fallback branch verbatim because it's the exact same steps, just in a different location. The other thing that I'm doing, I'll just show you in brief. You may or may not want to do it, but I'm saving the data here. And I won't go through all these rows because this video is getting quite long already. But all this data you can see on the output, I'm storing that in an Airtable. I dive over to Airtable, you can see that information here, and it's mainly useful because if, let's say the AI misinterpreted something and I couldn't find a file, then I can see here in the suggested save path where it has saved which file. So it's really for auditing purposes, but you don't necessarily need to do it. And the other thing that I've got going on that you don't necessarily need to do is this sort of soft delete of file. So once we have processed it, then I'm moving it into the processed subfolder. So soft delete is probably slightly misleading, but I want to open this up and show you what's going on here. So again, we've got the same get file by server relative URL API endpoint that we're hitting for our SharePoint site. We're passing in the specific file name that I want to do something with, and the instruction here is move to, and I'm giving it a new URL of where I want to move it to. So including the name, so it also renames the file for me. So that's basically it. I know there was a lot to cover there, so thank you so much for sticking with me. It was a long video. I think this is, even though it would need to be adapted for some environments, this forms a really good base for a lot of document digitization. So this can apply to so many businesses. I think you want me to elaborate on, particularly maybe self-hosting or hosting N8N in Azure or running Python from Azure in the execute nodes, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, I just hope this has been helpful. Thank you so much for sticking with me. It's been a long one. Until next time, cheers.